The sun was a hammer that never stopped striking the anvil of the earth. It beat down upon the high desert of the New Mexico territory with a relentless, white-hot fury that bleached the color from the sagebrush and turned the red dirt into a shimmering haze of heat lines. Clara had lost track of how long she had been walking. 2 days, 3. Time had dissolved into a rhythmic agony of putting one boot in front of the other, the leather soles worn thin and cracking against the unforgiving limestone. She was a ghost moving through a graveyard of stone and thorn. Her throat was parched, feeling as though she had swallowed a handful of the dusty alkali soil that coated the hem of her torn calico dress. Every breath rasped in her chest. She was lightheaded, the horizon tilting dangerously to the left and then the right, swimming in a pool of mirages. She had escaped the stagecoach at a watering stop miles back. Or perhaps it was leagues. Distance meant nothing here, slipping away while the driver argued with a passenger over a broken wheel. It had been a desperate, impulsive decision born of a terror that rode closer to her skin than the sweat drying on her neck. They were coming for her. She knew it. The law, or the men who bought the law. It made no difference. To stay on the marked road was to be found. To head into the wilderness was to die, perhaps, but to die free. Clara stumbled, her knee striking a jagged rock, but she did not cry out. She had no moisture left for tears. She pushed herself up, her palms scraped and bleeding, and looked toward a depression in the land where the vegetation seemed greener. Water. It had to be water. She moved toward it, her gait uneven, a staggering lurch toward salvation. The ground here was different, darker and softer than the baked hardpan she had crossed for miles. It looked like the edge of a dry creek bed, a wash that might hold a seep of moisture beneath the sand. She took a step, and her boots sank. It was a relief at first, the coolness of the mud against her blistering foot. She took another step, eager to reach the center where the water might pool. The ground gave way. It did not happen like a sudden drop, but rather a hungry, sucking embrace. One moment she was standing, the next, she was waist-deep in a slurry of sand and hidden water that gripped her legs with the strength of iron bands. She gasped, instinctively thrashing to pull her legs free, but the movement only served to liquefy the sand further, churning it into a heavy paste that dragged her down. Panic, sharp and cold, pierced through the heat haze of her exhaustion. She stopped moving, her chest heaving, the mud now pressing against her hips, rising toward her ribs with terrifying speed. "Help!" she croaked, but the sound was nothing more than a dry rustle, lost instantly to the vast silence of the basin. A half-mile to the east, the lowing of cattle created a dull roar that vibrated through the ground. A herd of 300 longhorns was moving north, a river of hide and horn kicking up a dust cloud that could be seen for 10 miles. Eli McCrae sat atop a big bay gelding, riding the flank of the herd. He was a man who looked as though he had been carved from the landscape itself, lean, weathered, with eyes the color of flint that saw everything and revealed nothing. He wore his hat low and his gun belt high, the leather tied down at his thigh. He preferred the perimeter. He preferred the silence of the edge to the chatter of the chuck wagon. "Hey, over yonder!" The shout came from a young ranch hand named Billy, riding point near the wash. Billy was standing in his stirrups, pointing his hat toward the green depression in the distance. Eli narrowed his eyes against the glare. He saw it, a dark shape in the white sand, thrashing feebly. A calf, perhaps. No, the shape was wrong. It was upright. "She's sinking!" the ranch hand yelled, his voice cracking with alarm. "Someone's in the sink!" Eli did not wait. He spurred the gelding, the horse responding instantly to the pressure of his knees. He broke from the herd in a gallop, leaning low over the horse's neck as they tore across the broken ground. The wind whipped past his ears, drowning out the shouts of the other men. As he drew closer, he saw her, a woman. Her hair had come loose from its pins, a tangled dark halo matted with dust. She was sunk to her lower chest now, her arms splayed out on the surface of the mud, her head lolling back as if she had given up the fight. Eli reined the gelding in hard 20 feet from the edge of the quicksand. He vaulted from the saddle before the horse had fully stopped, grabbing his lariat from the horn. "Stay still!" he roared, his voice a command that cut through her delirium. Clara opened her eyes, seeing a dark silhouette against the blinding sun. A giant, a demon, or an angel. She could not tell. Eli moved with practiced efficiency. He knew this country. He knew that a man on foot would only add to the tragedy. He looped the rope around a sturdy mesquite trunk, testing its root hold, then tied the other end around his waist. He grabbed a second rope and threw the loop. It landed perfectly around her shoulders, under her arms. "Grab the rope," he shouted. She stared at him, dazed, her hands trembling too violently to grip. "Damn it," Eli muttered. He waded in. The mud seized his boots immediately, heavy and cold. He moved carefully, spreading his weight, fighting the suction with every inch. When he reached her, the mud was at her armpits. She looked at him with eyes that were huge and glassy, the color of burnt whiskey. "Hold on to me," he said, his voice rough but calm. He dug his arms into the muck around her, finding purchase under her waist. He heaved, his back straining, the muscles in his shoulders bunching like knotted rope. The mud made a wet, sucking sound, reluctant to release its prize. Clara cried out, a sharp sound of pain as the pressure shifted. But Eli did not stop. He pulled with a savage strength, gritting his teeth, until the seal broke. She came free with a slurping rush. Eli stumbled back, dragging her with him, falling onto the harder bank. He scrambled backward, pulling her clear of the danger zone until they were both lying on the solid, baking earth, gasping for air. She was covered in gray slime, shivering violently despite the oppression of the afternoon heat. Her dress was sodden, clinging to her like a second skin, weighing 50 pounds. Eli sat up, wiping mud from his face. He looked at her. She was barely conscious, her lips blue. The evaporation in this dry air would freeze her to death even in the sun if he left her in those wet clothes. The rest of the herd was catching up, the dust cloud rolling toward them. He could hear the other riders shouting questions. Eli made a decision. He picked her up. She felt impossibly light, like a bird made of hollow bones beneath the mud, and carried her to his horse. He mounted, pulling her up in front of him, and rode away from the trail, toward a cluster of boulders that offered shade and a windbreak. He laid her down on the dry earth. Her teeth were chattering so hard he worried they might crack. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he muttered, though she was too far gone to hear him. He worked quickly, cutting the laces of her ruined boots with his knife. He stripped the heavy, mud-soaked dress from her body, peeling it away to reveal the thin, torn chemise underneath. It was not enough dry fabric to keep her warm, but it was better than the wet wool and cotton. He unrolled his bedroll, canvas and heavy wool blankets, and wrapped her tightly in it, tucking the ends in until she was a cocoon of warmth. He built a fire, small and hot, using dry sage and cow chips. By the time the sun began to dip toward the western horizon, turning the sky a bruised purple and blood orange, he had her settled near the heat. 3 riders approached from the herd, their horses blowing hard. It was the trail boss, a hard-eyed man named Miller, and 2 of the younger hands. They stared at the bundle by the fire. "Is she alive?" Miller asked, leaning on his saddle horn. "Barely," Eli said. He did not stand up. He sat cross-legged between the woman and the men, pouring coffee from a battered tin pot into a cup. "Half-starved, dehydrated, near drowned in the mud." "Who is she?" asked one of the hands, leaning forward, his eyes raking over the bundle with a hunger that Eli did not like. "A woman who needs rest," Eli said flatly. His hand rested casually on his knee, inches from the Colt peacemaker on his hip. "She ain't fit for conversation." Miller spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "We can't carry dead weight. McCrae, we got a schedule. Put her in the wagon if she lives. Drop her at the next town." "I'll watch her tonight," Eli said. "You boys keep the herd moving in the morning. I'll catch up." The young hand smirked. "Keeping her all to yourself?" Eli, that doesn't seem friendly. Eli looked up. The firelight caught the sharp angles of his face, casting deep shadows in his eye sockets. The look he gave the boy was cold enough to freeze water in July. She is my problem, Eli said softly, and I don't like company when I'm working on a problem. The threat hung in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. Miller grunted, sensing the shift in the wind. Let him be. If he wants to lose sleep nursing a stray, that's his business. Let's get back to the herd. They rode off, the young hand casting one last glance back before disappearing into the twilight. Eli turned back to the woman. She was stirring. Her eyelids fluttered and opened. For a moment, she stared blankly at the fire, and then terror flooded her face. She thrashed, trying to scramble backward, but the blankets tangled around her. Easy, Eli said, holding up a hand. You're safe. Clara scrambled until her back hit the rock face. She stared at him, her chest heaving. Who are you? Where am I? Name's Eli McCrae. You're in the basin, south of the San Andres. You stepped in a sinkhole? He reached for the tin cup. Here, drink this. Slow. She looked at the cup, then at him. Her eyes darted to the darkness beyond the firelight. The others? There were men. They're gone, Eli said. Just me and the coyotes tonight. She took the cup with shaking hands. She drank greedily, water spilling down her chin. He handed her a strip of dried beef jerky. She tore at it like a wolf, not bothering with manners. Eli watched her. She was young, maybe 25, though the sun had aged her skin. Under the dirt and bruises, there was a fineness to her features that spoke of a life softer than this one. But her hands, he had seen her hands when he pulled her out. Calloused, strong. You want to tell me how a woman ends up alone in this country without a horse or a canteen? Eli asked quietly. Clara froze, the jerky halfway to her mouth. The lie came to her lips automatically, a reflex honed by months of fear. I was traveling by wagon train. We got separated in a storm. I went looking for water and got lost. It was a poor lie. There had been no wagon trains on this route for weeks. The Apache were restless in the south, and the trails were cold. Eli looked at her over the rim of his coffee cup. He didn't blink. Is that so? Yes, she said, lifting her chin defiantly. My husband, he'll be looking for me. He does a poor job of looking, Eli said. Your boots are worn through. You've been walking for days. No tracks followed you. She said nothing, clutching the blanket tighter around her throat. She realized then that she was naked beneath the wool. A flush of shame heated her face, hotter than the sunburn. You, my clothes, ruined, hanging on the mesquite to dry. What's left of them? Eli said. He stood up and walked to his saddlebags, pulling out a clean flannel shirt and a pair of denim trousers. He tossed them to her. Put those on. They'll swallow you whole, but they're dry. He turned his back to her, walking to the edge of the firelight to check the horses. It was a gesture of privacy that surprised her. Clara dressed quickly, her limbs heavy and aching. The trousers were miles too long. She had to roll the cuffs 4 times. The shirt smelled of wood smoke, tobacco, and horse, a scent that was aggressively masculine but strangely comforting. When Eli returned, she was sitting by the fire, looking small and lost in his clothes. I have to leave, she said abruptly. In the morning. I have to keep moving. Where? Eli asked, sitting down opposite her. There's nothing west of here but rock and snakes for 50 miles. You walk out there again, the buzzards won't wait for you to die next time. I can't stay here, she whispered. You're not staying here, Eli said. I'm riding to the water station at Willow Creek. It is a 2-day ride. You can ride with me. From there, you can catch a stage. I have no money, she said. Didn't ask for any. Eli replied. He lay back against his saddle, pulling his hat over his eyes. Sleep. If you try to run at night, I won't chase you, but I won't bury you either. Clara watched him for a long time. He lay perfectly still, his breathing even. She did not sleep for hours. Every snap of a twig made her heart hammer. But eventually, exhaustion claimed her, and she drifted into a dreamless dark. Morning broke with a sky the color of a robin's egg, innocent and clear, belying the brutality of the land beneath it. They broke camp in silence. Clara tried to stand and walk to the horses, but her legs buckled. The muscle cramps from the dehydration and the struggle in the mud seized her calves. She fell hard before she hit the ground. Eli was there, catching her by the arm. He didn't say a word, didn't offer pity. He just hauled her up and lifted her onto the bay gelding, swinging up behind her. "Lean back," he ordered. "You fall off. I'm not stopping." They rode away from the herd, keeping parallel to the trail but distant enough to remain solitary. The landscape unfolded around them, a panorama of harsh beauty. Great spires of red rock jutted from the earth like the ruins of ancient cathedrals. Cacti stood like sentinels, their needles glowing gold in the morning light. The heat rose in waves, distorting the distance, making the mountains seem to float above the ground. Clara was acutely aware of the man behind her. His chest was a solid wall against her back. His arms, holding the reins, bracketed her. She could feel the steady beat of his heart against her shoulder blade. It was terrifying, this proximity. She had learned to fear the touch of men, to expect pain or demand in every contact, but Eli did not touch her more than necessary. He rode with a loose, easy rhythm. He did not ask questions. He did not demand gratitude. As the hours passed, a strange thing happened. The fear began to recede, replaced by a cautious curiosity. She watched his hands on the reins, competent, gentle with the horse. She noticed how his eyes constantly scanned the horizon, missing nothing. A hawk diving for a lizard, a shift in the wind. "Why did you help me?" she asked, her voice raspy. Eli didn't answer immediately. He guided the horse around a patch of cholla cactus. "A man doesn't leave a calf in the mud," he said finally. "Doesn't matter if the calf is foolish enough to walk there." "I'm not a calf," she said, a spark of anger cutting through her fatigue. "No," Eli agreed. "Calf has more sense than to walk into a sinkhole in a dry wash." She stiffened, but then she felt a rumble in his chest. A chuckle? It was gone before she could be sure. "You're running from the law," Eli said. It wasn't a question. Clara gripped the saddle horn. "I told you, my husband might be part of it," Eli cut in. "But you look over your shoulder too much for just a domestic dispute. And you flinch every time I touch my gun belt." Clara went silent. He saw too much. He was dangerous, but he was also the only thing standing between her and death. "I didn't do it," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "Whatever you think I did, I didn't do it." "Didn't ask," Eli said. "Doesn't matter to the desert what you did. Sun kills the saint and the sinner just the same." By late afternoon, the sky began to change. The blue deepened to a sickly, bruised yellow. The wind picked up, shifting from a hot breeze to a stinging gale that carried grit. "Dust," Eli said, his voice tightening. "Coming in fast." He spurred the horse into a trot. "Keep your head down. Pull the scarf over your nose." The storm hit them 10 minutes later. It was a wall of brown earth that swallowed the world. The light vanished, replaced by a twilight of swirling sand that scoured exposed skin like sandpaper. The horse whinnied in protest, tossing its head. "We need cover," Eli shouted over the roar of the wind. He guided them toward a ridge of limestone. There was a shallow overhang, barely deep enough for the horse and 2 people, carved out by centuries of wind. He practically threw Clara off the horse and shoved her into the back of the crevice, then dragged the horse in, forcing the animal to kneel. He collapsed beside her, pulling the heavy canvas bedroll over their heads to create a tent against the suffocating dust. It was pitch black under the canvas. The air was hot and thick. They were pressed together, thigh to thigh, shoulder to shoulder. The storm raged outside, a howling beast trying to tear their shelter away. Clara was trembling. The noise was deafening, like the roar of a fire, the fire she saw in her nightmares. She let out a small, whimpering sound, burying her face in her hands. "Breathe." Eli's voice was right at her ear. "It's just dirt. It'll pass." She turned toward him in the dark, seeking an anchor. Her hands found his arms, gripping the hard muscle. She pressed her face into his shoulder, shaking. I can't breathe." "You can," he said. His hand came up, resting on the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her dusty hair. It was a gesture of comfort, instinctive and rough. Clara shifted, her body pressing against his. In the terrifying dark, the heat of him was the only reality. The fear morphed into something else, a desperate need for connection, for proof of life. She lifted her head. Her face was inches from his. She could feel his breath on her cheek. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the space between their lips. She felt his hand tighten in her hair. The air between them crackled, electric and heavy. She leaned in, a silent plea for something to obliterate the fear. Eli pulled back. He stiffened, his hand withdrawing from her hair as if he had touched a hot iron. He shifted his weight, creating a deliberate inch of space between them. "Stay on your side," he said, his voice ragged, straining against the roar of the wind. "Storm will blow out by sunset." Clara froze, the rejection stinging like a slap. She pulled away, curling into herself, her face burning in the darkness. She wrapped her arms around her knees, listening to the wind scream, while Eli sat beside her, rigid and silent, staring into the blackness of the canvas, a man holding his breath against a different kind of storm. The dust storm had scoured the world clean, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt heavy on the skin. The air remained thick with a lingering haze, a copper-colored veil that turned the sun into a pale, ghostly disk. They rode out of the shelter of the rock overhang when the wind finally died, the bay gelding stepping high and nervous over the drifts of new sand. Eli McCrae did not speak. He kept the horse moving at a steady walk, preserving the animal's strength. Clara sat before him, her spine rigid, trying to hold herself away from his chest, but exhaustion was a tide she could not swim against. Every time the horse dipped into a wash or climbed a rise, she slumped back against him, and every time, she felt the solid, unyielding wall of his body. He did not push her away, nor did he hold her tighter than the ride required. He was simply there, a fact of the landscape as immutable as the mesas. They reached the way station just as the sun began to bleed into the western horizon. It was a desolate place, a crumbling adobe structure that had once served the Butterfield line before the route shifted south. The roof of the main building had partially collapsed, exposing the Vegas to the sky, but the corral was still standing, the rails gray and splintered but upright. A rusted water pump stood like a crooked finger in the center of the yard, beside a stone trough that was dry as a bone. "We stop here," Eli said, his voice rasping with the dust he had swallowed. He swung down from the saddle, his boots crunching on the gravel. He reached up for her, his hands spanning her waist. For a moment, as he lifted her down, she was suspended in the air, her face level with his. His eyes were shadowed by the brim of his hat, but she saw the fatigue in them, and something else, wary calculation. He set her on the ground, and her legs, numb from hours of riding, nearly gave way. He steadied her with a hand on her shoulder, then released her the instant she found her balance. "There is a well around back," he said, moving to the horse to loosen the cinch. "Pump likely needs priming. There is a bucket in the tack shed if the rats haven't eaten it." It was an instruction, not a request. Clara nodded, grateful for a task. She felt useless, a piece of baggage he had been forced to carry. She found the bucket, a battered tin thing with a dent in the rim, and walked to the pump. It took 10 minutes of pouring their precious canteen water into the mechanism and working the rusted handle until her shoulders burned. But finally, a stream of clear, cold water coughed out, splashing into the trough. She washed her face, the water stinging her sunburned skin, and drank until her stomach hurt. When she turned around, Eli had unsaddled the horse and was rubbing him down with a handful of dry grass. He had already set up a small camp in the shelter of the station's porch, where the roof was still sound. "Firewood," he said without looking up. Creosote burns hot. Don't wander far. Clara gathered the brittle branches of creosote bush, the resinous scent sharp in the cooling air. She built the fire efficiently, stacking the kindling in a tight pyramid. When she struck the match and the flame caught, she saw Eli watching her. He was leaning against a wooden post, his arms crossed, the firelight dancing in his dark eyes. "You have built a fire before," he observed. "I grew up on a farm in Missouri," Clara said, feeding a thicker branch into the flames. Before the wagon train," Eli said. His tone was neutral, but she heard the skepticism beneath it. He did not press her. Instead, he brought out the supplies: coffee beans, a small grinder, salt pork, and hardtack. He handed her the grinder. Clara took it, settling onto a flat stone. She ground the beans with a rhythmic, grinding crunch, the smell of coffee rising to combat the dust. As the coffee boiled, Eli sat on his bedroll, taking a piece of leather tack that had snapped during the storm. He pulled an awl and a coil of waxed thread from his saddlebag. He struggled with it, his large hands clumsy with the fine work in the dim light. "Let me," Clara said. Eli paused, looking at her. Then he handed her the leather and the tools. Clara worked quickly. Her fingers were slender but strong, and she drove the awl through the tough leather with practiced ease, looping the thread and pulling it tight. She did not look at him, but she could feel his gaze on her hands. She finished the stitch, knotted it off, and bit the thread. "Good work," Eli said, taking the strap back. He tested the strength of it. "Better than I could have done." "A woman learns to mend things if she wants them to last," Clara said quietly. "Nothing lasts out here if you don't tend to it." "No," Eli agreed. "Nothing does." They ate in silence, the darkness closing in around the small circle of firelight. The desert night was vast and filled with noises: the yip of a coyote, the skitter of a lizard over stone, the wind sighing through the ribs of the dead cholla. "The herd," Clara said, breaking the silence. "Will they come here?" This was the plan. Eli said, "There is water here. Good grass in the canyon behind the ridge. Miller will push them hard tomorrow. They will be here by sundown, the day after next. We will rest the horses. Wait for them. And then I put you on a stagecoach," Eli said. He tossed the dregs of his coffee into the fire, causing a hiss of steam. "And you go back to your husband, or wherever it is you are really going." Clara looked down at her hands, stained with dirt and grease. "I can't go back." Eli looked at her for a long moment, the silence stretching until it was uncomfortable. "We all have places we can't go back to. Clara, that doesn't mean we have anywhere else to go." He rolled out the bedding, giving her the bulk of the blankets and taking only a thin wool serenity for himself, lying near the fire with his head on his saddle. Clara lay down on the hard earth, pulling the canvas over her shoulder. She thought she would lie awake, terrified of the open space, but the rhythm of the day pulled her under. The dream always started the same way. The smell came first: lamp oil and old, dry timber. Then the heat, blistering and sudden. She was in the hallway of the big house in Lawrence. The wallpaper, with its pattern of blue cornflowers, was peeling, curling black as the flames licked up the wall. She could hear him laughing. The judge, he was laughing, a sound like dry leaves skittering on pavement. "You can't leave. Clara, you belong to the law, and I am the law." Then the sound changed. It wasn't laughter anymore. It was screaming, a woman's scream. Her sister, trapped in the bedroom, the door locked from the outside. Clara was pounding on the wood, her fists bloody, the heat searing her face. She could hear the rattle of iron. Shackles. He had put shackles on her. "Help me, Clara! Burn it down! Burn it all down!" The fire roared, a living beast, consuming the air, consuming her. "No!" Clara screamed, thrashing against the weight of the smoke. I didn't light it!" She woke with a gasp that tore her throat, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She was sitting up, her hands clawing at the air. Strong arms were around her instantly, not restraining, but holding, a solid weight grounding her to the earth. Easy, a voice rumbled against her ear. You are safe. You are at the station. Breathe. Clara sobbed, a dry, hacking sound. She grabbed the arms holding her fingers digging into the fabric of a flannel shirt. She realized she was clinging to Eli. He was kneeling beside her, one arm around her shoulders, the other hand resting lightly on her back. The fire, she gasped. She's burning. There is no fire, Eli said, his voice low and steady. A rumble of thunder in the distance. Just the campfire. Look. He turned her gently toward the dying embers of their small fire. It was peaceful, just a bed of glowing red coals. He locked the door, Clara whispered, trembling so hard her teeth clicked together. I couldn't get her out. Eli did not ask who. He did not ask why. He simply held her as the tremors rocked through her body. He was warm, a solid, living presence in the void of her nightmare. He smelled of sage and sweat, a smell of life. He sat with her for a long time, his hand moving in slow, rhythmic circles on her back, calming a frightened animal. When her breathing finally slowed, she became aware of their position. She was pressed against his chest, her head tucked under his chin. It was intimate, more intimate than anything she had known in her marriage. She pulled back slightly, wiping her face with the back of her hand. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean to wake you. I wasn't sleeping, Eli said. He released her, sitting back on his heels, but he didn't move away. You scream loud enough to wake the dead, Clara. Do I? And you talk. She froze. What did I say? Enough, Eli said. He looked at her, his face unreadable in the starlight. You spoke of chains, and a judge. Clara turned her face away. It was a dream, just a dream. Dreams have a way of being truer than the day, Eli murmured. He stood up, moving stiffly. Go back to sleep. I will build up the fire. He did not ask her anything else, but as Clara lay back down, she saw him checking the load in his revolver before he settled back onto his blanket. He did not sleep again that night. He sat watching the dark, a sentinel guarding her against ghosts he could not shoot. The morning brought a hard, bright wind that rattled the loose boards of the station. They spent the morning working. It was a way to avoid the conversation that hung between them like a loaded gun. Eli checked the horse's hooves and repaired a section of the corral fence. Clara focused on the tack, cleaning the leather with a scrap of cloth and a bit of tallow she found in the shed. It was just past noon when the dog barked. Eli didn't have a dog. He froze, his hand going instantly to his hip. He looked toward the ridge. A rider was coming down the trail, followed by a scruffy blue heeler dog. The rider was moving slowly, picking his way through the rocks. Get inside, Eli said, his voice low and sharp. Who is it? Clara asked, standing up, her heart jumping. Doesn't matter. Get inside. Stay away from the window. Clara scrambled into the dark interior of the adobe station. She pressed herself against the wall beside the doorframe, where she could listen but not be seen. Eli walked out to the center of the yard, his stance casual, his thumb hooked in his belt. He watched the rider approach. The stranger was a man in a dust-colored duster, riding a tall roan. He had a face like a dried apple, wrinkled and brown, and a shotgun resting across his saddle horn. He reined in 10 yards from Eli. The dog sat in the dust, panting. Afternoon, the stranger said. His voice was scratchy. Afternoon, Eli replied. He didn't smile. Hot enough for you? It's summer in the territory, Eli said. It is always hot. The stranger laughed, a wheezing sound. Truth told. I'm looking for water. My canteen is running dry. Pump is working, Eli said, jerking his chin toward the trough. Help yourself. The man dismounted. He walked to the pump, drinking from the ladle. He took his time, his eyes scanning the camp. He looked at the 2 bedrolls. He looked at the fire pit. He looked at the second saddle sitting on the corral fence, a saddle that was clearly too small for Eli. Traveling alone? The stranger asked, wiping his mouth with his sleeve. Waiting on a herd, Eli said. Be here tomorrow. Big job, driving cattle, the man said. He walked back to his horse but didn't mount. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I'm not in the cattle business myself. I'm looking for a business. Eli stayed still. Is that so? Yeah, looking for a woman. Runaway. Roughly 5'4", dark hair, pretty face if you clean off the dirt. Name of Clara, though she might go by something else. Clara, inside the shack, pressed her hand over her mouth to stifle a gasp. Haven't seen any women, Eli said, his voice flat. Not a place for ladies out here. The stranger stepped closer, tapping the paper against his leg. She's a fugitive, friend, wanted for murder in Kansas, killed her husband, a judge, bad business, burned him alive in his own house. Eli's expression didn't flicker. Sounds like a dangerous woman. Oh, she is, dangerous and deceitful. There is a $500 reward, dead or alive, though the folks paying prefer alive so they can hang her legally. The man's eyes drifted to the door of the shack. Are you sure you haven't seen her? I cut some signs back. Boot prints. Looked small. I had a boy riding with me, Eli said smoothly. Got sick. I sent him back to town on the wagon yesterday. He wears small boots. The stranger stared at Eli. Eli stared back. The silence stretched, tight as a bowstring. The stranger looked at Eli's gun, tied low. He looked at Eli's eyes, which were cold and empty of fear. The stranger was a businessman, and he calculated the odds. Well, the stranger said, putting the paper away, if you see her, be careful. She's a snake. I'll keep an eye out, Eli said. The stranger mounted his horse. He tipped his hat, obligated for the water. He turned the roan and rode out, the dog trotting at the horse's heels. Eli watched him go until he was nothing but a speck in the heat haze. Only then did he turn and walk into the shack. Clara was huddled in the corner, her face pale as milk. Eli stood in the doorway, blocking the light. He looked furious, not a shouting fury, but a cold, hard anger that made him seem larger than the room. Murder, he said. It wasn't like that, Clara whispered. A judge, Eli said. You are running from the killing of a judge. Do you have any idea what they will do to you if they catch you? Do you have any idea what they will do to me for standing here lying to a bounty man? I didn't kill him, Clara cried, stepping forward. I didn't. Then tell me the truth, Eli roared. It was the first time he had raised his voice. I am risking my neck for you, woman. I deserve to know the weight of the load I am carrying. Clara trembled, tears spilling over. He was my husband, Judge Ambrose. He was cruel. He liked to hurt things. Me, my sister. She took a breath, a ragged sound. He kept my sister in the attic. She was simple, in the head. He said she was a sin. He would go up there. She choked on the words. That night, I tried to stop him. He hit me, knocked me out. When I woke up, the house was on fire. He had knocked over a lamp in the struggle. Or maybe my sister did it. I don't know. I tried to get to them. The door was locked. I heard them screaming. I couldn't save them. I ran. Everyone thought I did it because I ran. She sank to the floor, burying her face in her hands. I didn't kill him, but I'm glad he's dead. Does that make me a murderer? Eli watched her. The anger drained out of him, replaced by a heavy weariness. He knew the look of truth. He had seen enough liars to know when a soul was laid bare. He walked over to her and crouched down. He didn't touch her. $500, he said quietly. That is a lot of money. Clara looked up, fear in her eyes. Are you going to turn me in? Eli looked at the door where the stranger had gone. I told him I hadn't seen you. I don't go back on my word. He stood up. Stay inside. He might circle back. Night fell, bringing a chill that seeped into the bones. They sat by the fire again, but the silence was different now. It was heavier, loaded with the weight of her confession. Clara shivered, rubbing her arms. She had changed back into the dress, which had dried stiff and wrinkled, but she was still cold. You're limping, Eli said. He was cleaning his gun, the metal gleaming in the firelight. It's nothing, Clara said. Just a scrape. Show me. It's fine. Show me. Clara. Infection kills faster than a bullet out here. Clara hesitated, then slowly lifted the hem of her skirt. On her calf, where the quicksand had ground the fabric against her skin, was a raw, angry gash. It was swollen and red at the edges. Eli hissed through his teeth. He holstered the gun and moved closer. That needs cleaning. I have whiskey and a clean rag. He fetched the bottle and the cloth. This is going to burn. I know, she said softly. He poured a little whiskey onto the rag. He hesitated, his hand hovering over her leg. I need to see the whole thing. The fabric is in the way. Clara looked at him. His face was grim, focused on the task, but his eyes were dark. Slowly, with trembling fingers, she unbuttoned the side of the skirt and pushed it up, revealing her leg to the knee. Her skin was pale, contrasting sharply with the dark bruise forming around the cut. Eli reached out. His hand was rough, calloused from years of rope and rain, but his touch was startlingly gentle. He grasped her ankle to steady her leg. His thumb brushed against the arch of her foot. Clara drew in a sharp breath. The contact sent a jolt through her that had nothing to do with pain. Ready? Eli asked, his eyes meeting hers. Yes. He pressed the whiskey-soaked rag to the wound. Clara gasped, her hand flying out to grip his shoulder. Her nails dug into his shirt. She bit her lip to keep from crying out. Steady, Eli murmured. Almost done. He cleaned the wound with efficient, small strokes. But when he was finished, he didn't pull away. His hand remained on her calf, his fingers tracing the line of the muscle. The heat of his palm seeped into her skin. The air between them shifted. It became thick, charged with a raw, sudden hunger. Clara looked at him, the sharp line of his jaw, the dark stubble, the mouth that rarely smiled. She realized she wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of the way her body was answering his touch. Eli looked up. His gaze traveled from her leg to her face, lingering on her lips. His eyes were dilated, black pools reflecting the fire. He saw the fear in her, but he also saw the need. He moved his hand up slightly, just an inch, his fingers brushing the back of her knee. It was a question. Clara trembled, but she did not pull away. She leaned toward him, drawn by a gravity she couldn't name. Eli froze. He closed his eyes for a second, a look of pain crossing his face, as if he were fighting a battle within himself. Then, slowly, deliberately, he pulled his hand away. He capped the whiskey bottle with a sharp thud. Keep it covered, he said, his voice rougher than usual. It will heal. He stood up and walked to the edge of the firelight. Turning his back to her, he took a deep breath, staring out at the empty desert. Clara pulled her skirt down, her heart pounding so hard she felt dizzy. She watched his silhouette against the stars. Eli? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. He didn't turn around. Yeah? Do you think I'm damned? The question hung in the cold air. She waited, terrified of the answer. She thought of the fire, the screams, the judge's laughter. Eli turned his head slightly, just enough for her to see his profile. Not for surviving. Clara, he said, never for surviving. He walked out into the dark then, to check the horses, leaving her alone by the fire with the echo of his words and the ghost of his touch still burning on her skin. The decision was made in the gray hour before dawn, while the morning star still hung low and bright like a lantern in the west. The herd would be arriving soon, a chaotic river of noise and dust that would bring with it prying eyes and loose tongues. Eli knew the way of cattle camps. Gossip traveled faster than a prairie fire, and the stranger with the shotgun would not be far behind. He kicked dirt over the dying embers of their fire and turned to Clara. She was rolling up the canvas bedroll, her movement stiff from the cold. Leave the saddle, Eli said. We are taking the bay. We travel light. Clara straightened, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. The stagecoach? You said? No stagecoach. Eli cut her off, tightening the cinch on the gelding. That bounty man knows my face now. He suspects if you step on a stage in Willow Creek, there will be a lawman waiting at the next stop. The telegraph wires run faster than horses." "Then where?" Clara asked. A tremor of fear entered her voice, fragile as glass. "West," Eli said, looking toward the jagged silhouette of the canyon lands that broke the horizon like a row of broken teeth. "Into the deep country. The Malpais. There is no water for 30 miles, and the trails are goat paths. No marshal will follow us there. They value their horses too much." He mounted the bay and reached a hand down. "Come on." Clara looked at the desolate landscape. Then, at the hand, it was a choice between the cage she knew and the wilderness she feared. She took his hand. He swung her up behind him, the leather saddle creaking under their combined weight. They turned their backs on the way station and the safety of the trail, riding straight into the broken heart of the territory. The land changed rapidly as they rode. The flat open basin gave way to a labyrinth of red rock canyons, twisting and turning upon themselves like a nest of snakes. The sun here did not just shine. It radiated from the stone walls, trapping them in an oven of dry heat. The air smelled of hot iron and ancient dust. It was a grueling, punishing trek. The bay gelding, strong as he was, labored under the double load on the steep inclines. They spent hours walking, leading the horse over shale slides where a single misstep meant a 100-foot fall. Water became their god. They had 2 canteens. Eli rationed them with a miser's strictness. "Wet your tongue," he commanded when they stopped in the shade of a twisted juniper at noon. "Don't swallow. Just hold it." Clara did as she was told, the warm metallic taste of the water agony against her parched throat. She watched Eli. He took less than she did, his lips cracked and white, his eyes scanning the rim of the canyon above them. He was a creature of this harsh world, shedding comfort as easily as a snake sheds skin. By the 3rd day, the silence of the canyons had seeped into them. They spoke only of necessity. Watch your step. Drink. Rest here. But in the silence, a different kind of language was being spoken. It was in the way Eli checked her boots for scorpions before she put them on. It was in the way Clara divided the last piece of hardtack, ensuring his half was slightly larger, though he always tried to refuse it. They camped that night on a narrow ledge overlooking a dry riverbed. The temperature plummeted as soon as the sun vanished, the stone radiating its stored heat away into the infinite black sky. They huddled together against the rock wall, the single bedroll wrapped around them both. A wolf howled somewhere in the darkness below, a lonely, mournful sound that echoed off the canyon walls, multiplying until it sounded like a pack surrounding them. Clara shivered violently. It wasn't just the cold. It was the vastness, the feeling of being a speck of dust in a universe that did not care if she lived or died. "They won't come up here," Eli said softly. His arm was around her, his hand rubbing her upper arm to generate warmth. "Too steep." Clara turned her head. His face was inches from hers, illuminated by the faint, milky light of the stars. She could see the fatigue etched into the lines around his eyes, the shadow of beard on his jaw. He looked dangerous, wild, and yet he was the only solid thing in her world. "You're tired," she whispered. "I'm all right." "You gave me the last of the water," she said. "I'm used to it." Clara looked at his mouth. A sudden, overwhelming surge of emotion crashed over her, gratitude, fear, and a hunger that had nothing to do with food. She wanted to be close to him, to bridge the gap of silence and trauma that stood between them. She wanted to prove she was alive. Without thinking, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. It was a clumsy kiss, tasting of dust and desperation. For a second, Eli was still as stone. Then, with a low groan in his throat, he kissed her back. His mouth was hot, his stubble rough against her skin. The kiss deepened, becoming hungry, urgent. His hand moved from her arm to her waist, pulling her tighter against him. The sensation of his strength, the sudden flare of masculine heat, triggered a memory, not of love, but of violence. A heavy hand, the smell of brandy, the feeling of being trapped. Clara gasped and jerked back. Breaking the kiss, she scrambled away from him until her back hit the cold stone wall. Her breath came in ragged sobs, her hand flying to her mouth as if she had been burned. Tears, hot and humiliating, spilled over. "I'm sorry," she choked out. "I can't. I'm sorry." She waited for the anger. She waited for the insult, the wounded pride of a man rejected. Eli sat perfectly still. He did not reach for her. He did not curse. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Don't apologize," he said. His voice was rough, but devoid of malice. "I wanted to." Clara wept, shaking. "I did, but I know," Eli said. He picked up a stick and poked at the small fire, sending a shower of sparks upward. The body remembers fear. "Clara, it takes time to teach it something else." He looked at her then, his gaze steady and piercing. "I am not him, and I am not a man who takes what isn't given freely." "I know you aren't," she whispered. "Then listen to me," Eli said. He leaned forward, intense but keeping his distance. "I want you. I won't lie about that, but I want you when you want me. All of you. And not a minute before." He turned back to the fire, effectively ending the conversation. Clara watched him, her heart aching with a mixture of shame and a profound, deepening trust. He had granted her the power of refusal, a gift she had never been given before. She curled up on her side of the blanket, watching his profile until sleep finally took her. Morning brought a merciless white light and a discovery that shattered the fragile peace. Eli had gone to scout the trail ahead on foot, leaving Clara to pack the saddlebags. The bay gelding stood dozing, swishing its tail at flies. Clara was reorganizing the supplies, trying to make the load balanced. She reached deep into the leather saddlebag to retrieve a tin of percussion caps Eli had asked for. Her fingers brushed against stiff paper tucked behind the leather lining. Curious. She pulled it out. It was folded into a tight square, worn at the creases as if it had been opened and refolded 100 times. Clara unfolded it. It was a wanted poster. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded, but the face sketching was undeniable. It was younger, the jaw less lined, the eyes less guarded. But it was Eli. But the name printed in bold, black block letters was not Eli McCrae. Wanted for murder, Silas Grant dead or alive, reward, $200. The text below detailed the crime. Shot a man in cold blood in the town of Abilene, armed and extremely dangerous. Clara stared at the paper, the blood draining from her face. Silas Grant. The name tasted foreign on her tongue. She felt a sudden vertigo, the ground beneath her shifting. He had lied. Not just a small lie, but a fundamental one. He wasn't just a cowboy who drifted. He was a killer with a price on his head, just like her. Or was he like her? Cold blood. "Put it away!" The voice came from behind her, low and dangerous. Clara spun around, clutching the paper to her chest. Eli was standing 10 feet away, his rifle held loosely in one hand. He had returned silently, like a ghost. His face was hard, the mask he wore for the world firmly in place. "Who is Silas Grant?" Clara demanded, her voice trembling. Eli walked past her to the horse. He didn't look at her. "A man who died a long time ago." "Don't!" Clara stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "Don't you dare walk away. You made me tell you everything. You made me bleed my truth out in that shack while you sat there and judged me. And all the while, you were like this?" She shook the paper at him. Eli stopped. His jaw clenched, a muscle jumping in his cheek. He snatched the paper from her hand and crumpled it in his fist. "I never judged you," he said quietly. "You lied to me," Clara shouted. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, a sharp report. "You let me think you were just a man helping me. But you're running too. You killed a man in Abilene." "I killed a dog," Eli spat, his composure cracking. "He walked on 2 legs, but he was a dog." He threw the crumpled paper into the dirt. "He was the son of the town banker, rich, entitled. He took a fancy to my sister, Mary. She was 16, slow in the mind, sweet as a child." Eli looked away, staring at the red rock wall as if seeing a dusty street in Kansas. He cornered her in the alley behind the feed store. I heard her screaming. I ran. I didn't ask questions. I didn't wait for the sheriff. I put 2 bullets in his chest before he could finish what he started." He looked back at Clara, his eyes blazing with a ferocious, old anger. "The law? The law said it was a misunderstanding. Said a boy like that wouldn't hurt a girl like her. They said I murdered a prominent citizen. They were going to hang me before the sun set. So I ran. And I left her alone. That is the sin I carry. Clara, not the killing. Leaving." Clara stood frozen. The story mirrored her own so closely, it stole the breath from her lungs. The sister, the powerful man, the violence born of protection, but the fear and the stress of the journey twisted her reaction. She felt exposed, vulnerable. She had trusted him because he seemed solid, moral. Now the lines were blurred. "So you're just like them," she said, her voice shaking. "Just like every other man. You have secrets. You have violence in you. You think you can fix everything with a gun and then hide the truth." "I am nothing like the man you married," Eli growled. Stepping closer, "Don't you ever say that. You lied to me. To keep you alive," Eli shouted back. "If I told you I was wanted, would you have ridden with me? Would you have trusted me to pull you out of that mud? No, you would have run, and you would be dead. Maybe I would rather be dead than owned by another liar." The words hung in the air, cruel and sharp. Eli recoiled as if she had slapped him. The fire in his eyes died, replaced by a wall of ice. He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the door to his soul slam shut. "Fine," he said. His voice was dead flat. "Think what you want, but get on the horse. We have miles to cover." He turned his back on her and began walking, leading the horse by the reins. He did not offer her a hand up. He did not look back. The rest of the day was a torture of silence. The heat seemed hotter, the trail steeper. Clara rode, her back stiff, watching Eli's shoulders as he walked ahead. He moved with a relentless, mechanical pace, ignoring the sweat soaking his shirt, ignoring the stumble of his boots on the rocks. Clara's anger slowly evaporated, leaving behind a residue of ash. She replayed his words. "The sin I carry is not the killing, the leaving." She looked at the crumpled ball of paper he had left in the dirt miles back. She realized, with a sinking heart, that she had struck the one wound he couldn't bandage. She had called him the one thing he despised. They camped in a narrow slot canyon where a trickle of water seeped from the sandstone. Darkness fell swiftly, a heavy curtain dropping over the world. Eli set up camp with efficient, silent movements. He did not look at her. He sat on a rock 5 yards away, sharpening his knife. The rasp, rasp, rasp of the stone the only sound in the night. Clara sat by the small fire, her arms wrapped around her knees. She felt colder than she had the night before, despite the air being warmer. The distance between them was a chasm. "Eli," she said softly. He didn't look up. Rasp, rasp. "I didn't mean it," she said. "About you being like him." Eli paused the blade. He looked at the knife, checking the edge, but he didn't speak. "I was scared," Clara continued, her voice trembling. "Finding that paper, it made me feel like I didn't know anything, like I was falling again." Eli sheathed the knife. He finally looked at her. His face was weary, stripped of its defenses. "You know me, Clara. The name on a paper doesn't change the man who sat watch over you while you slept. It doesn't change the man who cleaned your wound." "I know," she whispered. "I know." She stood up. Her legs were shaking, but she forced them to move. She walked across the small space separating them. Eli watched her come. He didn't move to stop her, but he didn't welcome her either. He sat tense, waiting. Clara stopped in front of him. She reached out and took his hand, the hand that had killed a man, the hand that had pulled her from the earth. She pressed it to her cheek. It was rough, warm, and alive. "I don't want to be alone tonight," she said. "I don't want to be on my side of the fire." Eli let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for 10 years. The tension went out of his shoulders. He turned his hand, cupping her face, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "I am not a gentleman." "Clara," he warned. his voice husky. "I have forgotten how to be— I don't need to be gentle," she said. "I need something real." She dropped to her knees between his legs, looking up at him. The firelight caught the unshed tears in her eyes. She reached for the buttons of his shirt. Eli made a sound, low in his throat, and pulled her up. This time, he didn't pull back. He kissed her. And it wasn't like the night before. It wasn't tentative. It was a collision. He pulled her down onto the bedroll, the hard ground forgotten. His hands were everywhere, tangling in her hair, gripping her waist, mapping the curves of her body as if to memorize her before she could vanish. Clara met him with equal force. She tore at his clothes, needing to feel skin against skin. When his hands touched her bare waist, she flinched instinctively, the old fear rearing its head. Eli froze instantly. He hovered over her, his weight supported on his elbows, his chest heaving. "Clara, don't stop," she begged, clutching his shoulders. "Please, just don't stop." "Look at me," he commanded. She opened her eyes. He was looking down at her with a raw, terrifying intensity. "I see you," he rasped. "I am here, nowhere else." He lowered himself slowly, giving her time, letting her feel the weight of him, the heat of him. He was rough. Yes, his calluses scraped her skin. His stubble burned, but there was a reverence in his touch that shattered her heart. When they finally joined, it was a desperate, aching thing. It was not the sweet romance of storybooks. It was two broken people trying to fuse their jagged edges together. Clara cried out, not in pain, but in release, her nails digging into his back. Eli buried his face in her neck, murmuring her name like a prayer or a plea. The desert wind sighed through the canyon above them, but down in the dark, amidst the tangled blankets and the dying fire, there was only the sound of breath and the frantic, life-affirming rhythm of two bodies refusing to let the darkness win. They lay together afterward, limbs tangled, covered in a sheen of sweat that cooled rapidly in the night air. Eli pulled the heavy wool blanket over them, tucking it around her shoulders with obsessive care. Clara laid her head on his chest, listening to the slow, strong thud of his heart. She felt bruised, exhausted, and utterly, completely safe. "Silas?" she whispered into the dark, testing the name. Eli's arm tightened around her. "No," he said softly, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Eli. Eli's the one who is here. Eli's the one who stays." Clara closed her eyes, her hand resting over his heart. "Eli," she agreed, and for the first time in years, she slept without dreaming of fire. The climb to the mesa was a test of faith as much as endurance. The trail was little more than a scar on the face of the red sandstone, a narrow switchback that zigzagged up the vertical cliff face toward the sky. The air grew thinner, sharper, losing the suffocating heat of the canyon floor and taking on the crisp scent of juniper and piñon pine. Eli walked the lead, the reins of the bay gelding wrapped loosely around his fist. He moved with a slow, deliberate rhythm, checking every loose stone before trusting his weight to it. Clara followed behind the horse, her hand resting on the animal's sweaty flank for balance. Her legs burned, the muscles trembling with every step. But she did not complain. She had learned in the last 4 days that complaints were a waste of breath, and breath was the only currency that mattered up here. When they finally crested the rim, the world opened up. The mesa was a high island in the sky, a flat expanse of tall yellow grass and twisted trees isolated from the desert below by 1,000 feet of sheer rock. In the center of the plateau, nestled against a wind-carved overhang, stood a shack. It was gray and weathered, the wood bleached by decades of sun, looking less like a structure built by hands and more like something that had grown out of the earth itself. "I built it 10 years ago," Eli said, his voice breaking the silence of the wind. He stopped, wiping the sweat from his brow with his sleeve. "Used to winter up here when I was trapping cats. Haven't been back since Abilene." Clara walked forward, her boots crunching on the dry grass. She looked at the shack, then out at the view. To the west, the land fell away into a vast, purple haziness of mountain ranges stacked one behind the other like jagged waves. It felt like the edge of the world. "It's quiet," she whispered. "Quiet is good," Eli said. "Quiet means we are alone." They set up camp inside the shack. It was dusty and smelled of rat droppings and old sage, but the roof held against the wind, and the stone fireplace was solid. For the first time in a week, they had 4 walls around them. That first night on the mesa, they slept for 12 hours. It was the sleep of the dead, a deep, black unconsciousness born of sheer survival. When Clara woke, the sun was already high, cutting through the cracks in the door in dusty beams of gold. Eli was gone. Panic, sharp and familiar, spiked in her chest. She scrambled up from the bedroll, her heart hammering, and ran to the door. He was there. He was sitting on a rock at the edge of the cliff, cleaning his rifle. The bay gelding was grazing on a patch of grama grass nearby. Clara leaned against the doorframe, letting out a long, shuddering breath. He hadn't left. He hadn't left. Over the next 3 days, a routine emerged. It was a strange, domestic existence played out on the roof of the world. They were fugitives, hunted by men with guns and greed. But up here, time seemed to stretch and slow. They worked to make the shack livable. Eli repaired the corral fence with fallen timber, his axe ringing out in the crisp air, a sound of construction, not destruction. Clara swept the floor with a bundle of stiff brush, cleared the spider webs from the rafters, and organized their dwindling supplies. There was an intimacy in the work. They moved around each other in the small space, a dance of avoidance and attraction. When Eli brought in water from the spring, their hands would brush as she took the bucket. When she mended a tear in his shirt, he would sit shirtless by the fire, watching her needle flash in the light, his eyes dark and heavy. It was on the 3rd evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun bleed into the horizon, that Eli spoke of the future. "Arizona Territory," he said, pointing toward the darkening west. "It is a hard land, but it is big. A man can get lost there, a woman too." Clara looked at his profile. "Is that where we are going?" "I know a spot near the Mongolian Rim," Eli continued, his voice low. "Good timber, water that runs all year. We could build something there, something better than a shack." He turned to look at her. Nobody knows Eli McCrae in Arizona, and nobody knows Clara, whatever your name was before. "Clara Vance," she said softly. "That was my maiden name. Clara Vance." Eli tested the sound of it. "I like it. It sounds like a woman who starts over." Clara looked down at her hands. They were rougher now, the nails broken, the skin brown from the sun. "Do you think we can really start over, Eli, after everything?" "I think the world is big enough for 2 ghosts to find a place to haunt together," he said. He reached out and took her hand. His thumb rubbed the back of her knuckles. "But you have to let go of the heavy things you're carrying. Clara, you can't walk all the way to Arizona dragging a graveyard behind you." Clara pulled her hand away, wrapping her arms around herself. The air was cooling, but the chill she felt came from inside. Some things don't let go. "The husband?" Eli asked gently. "No," Clara whispered. She stared out at the canyon, her eyes losing focus as the memory washed over her. "Not him. I'm glad he's dead. I told you that." She took a ragged breath. "It was my sister, Sarah." Eli went still. He didn't speak, didn't push. He just waited, offering her the silence she needed to fill. "She was soft," Clara said, her voice trembling. "In the head. She had the mind of a 6-year-old. Even though she was 20, she loved shiny things, ribbons, fire." Clara closed her eyes. "The judge, he hated her. He said she was an embarrassment. He kept her locked in the attic room. He put bars on the window. He said it was for her safety, but it was a prison." A tear leaked out, cutting a clean track through the dust on her cheek. "That night, the fight. I don't know how the lamp went over. Maybe I did it. Maybe he did. But the oil, it spread so fast. The curtains went up like paper." She turned to Eli, her face twisted in agony. "I ran to the stairs. The smoke was so thick I couldn't see. I could hear her. Eli. She was screaming my name. She was pounding on the door. I had the key. I had it in my pocket. She held up her hand, clenching her fist as if gripping a ghost key. I got to the door. The handle was hot, red hot. I tried to put the key in the lock, but my hands were shaking, and the smoke... I dropped it. A sob tore out of her throat, a raw, ugly sound. I dropped the key. It fell into the fire on the floorboards. I tried to reach for it, but the heat, it drove me back. I couldn't reach it. She was screaming, and I couldn't reach it. She looked at Eli, her eyes pleading for judgment, for condemnation. I left her. I jumped out the window to the porch roof, and I left her there to burn. I saved myself. That is why I run. Eli, not from the law, from her voice. Eli stared at her. The pain in her eyes was a mirror of his own. He saw the alley in Abilene. He saw his own sister, Mary, crying as he ran into the dark. He moved then. He didn't offer platitudes. He didn't tell her it wasn't her fault. He knew that guilt was a stone that no amount of words could lift. He pulled her into his arms. He held her tight, crushing her against his chest, burying his face in her hair. Clara broke down, weeping violently, her whole body shaking with the force of the release. "I'm sorry," she gasped into his shirt. "I'm so sorry, Sarah." "I know," Eli rumbled, his voice thick. "I know." He held her until the sun was gone and the stars wheeled overhead. He held her until the tears ran dry and she lay exhausted against him. "We carry them," Eli whispered into the dark. "We carry them because they can't walk anymore. But we don't have to die with them. Clara, we don't have to die." The next day passed in a haze of quiet tenderness. The revelation had launched the boil of Clara's trauma, draining the poison. She felt lighter, hollowed out but clean. They worked on the cabin roof, replacing the rotted shingles with slabs of bark and slate. Eli worked shirtless, the sun gilding the muscles of his back. Clara watched him openly now, no longer hiding her gaze. That evening, the wind picked up. It wasn't a storm, just a steady, rhythmic current of air that rushed over the mesa, singing through the needles of the pine trees and whistling around the corners of the shack. It sounded like a cello, low and mournful. They had eaten a meager dinner of beans and cornbread cooked in a skillet. Eli kicked dirt over the fire and stood up. "Listen," he said. "To what?" "The music." He held out his hand. Clara looked at him, surprised. "There is no music. The wind," Eli said. "Oldest fiddle in the world." He stepped closer, his hand still extended. "Dance with me." Clara hesitated. They were dirty, tired, and hunted. Standing on a precipice in the middle of nowhere, it seemed absurd. It seemed impossible. But she took his hand. Eli pulled her in close, his arm going around her waist. He didn't lead her in a waltz or a reel. He simply swayed, moving her with him in a slow, turning circle. There was no music, only the sound of their boots scuffing the dirt and the sigh of the wind. Clara rested her cheek against his bare chest. She could smell the day on him, sweat and pine resin and sun. They moved together, two broken pieces fitting perfectly into a whole. The friction of their bodies generated a heat that was different from the lust of the canyon. This was slower, deeper. Eli's hand moved up her back, his fingers spreading over her shoulder blade. He dipped his head, his lips brushing her temple. "Stay with me," he whispered. It was a command and a plea. "I'm here," Clara whispered back. "No," Eli said, tightening his grip. "I mean, after Arizona, the years after that. Stay with me." Clara pulled back slightly to look at him. His eyes were wide open, vulnerable in a way she had never seen. He was offering her a life. "I will," she said, "as long as you want me. Forever, then," Eli said. He leaned in to kiss her, a slow, sweet sealing of a promise. The sound of a rock falling shattered the moment. It was a small sound, a clack-clack of stone hitting stone, but in the silence of the mesa, it was a gunshot. Eli broke the embrace instantly. The softness vanished from his face, replaced by the mask of the predator. He spun toward the rim of the cliff, his hand dropping to the Colt on his hip. "Get inside," he hissed. "Now!" Clara didn't argue. She backed into the darkness of the doorway. Eli stood frozen, scanning the tree line. "Show yourself," he called out, his voice echoing. "I know you're there." For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, a shadow detached itself from the trunk of a ponderosa pine 50 yards away. A man stepped into the moonlight. He was short, wiry, dressed in buckskins and a calico shirt. His hair was held back by a red cloth band. He held a Winchester rifle, but the barrel was pointed at the sky. "Apache," Clara whispered, peering from the dark. Eli relaxed his stance slightly, but his hand stayed on his gun. He spoke a few words in a language Clara didn't understand. Harsh, guttural sounds. The Apache man replied, gesturing toward the valley floor below. He walked closer, stopping 10 paces away. His face was painted with a single stripe of white clay across the nose. "Victorio's scout," Eli muttered to Clara without looking back. "I traded horses with his band 2 winters ago. We have no quarrel." Eli walked out to meet him. They spoke in low tones, a mix of Spanish and Apache. Clara watched, her heart in her throat. She saw Eli reach into his pocket and pull out a pouch of tobacco. He handed it to the scout. The scout took it, nodded, and pointed south, then made a sign of cutting a throat. Eli stiffened. He asked a question, urgent and sharp. The scout nodded again, held up 3 fingers, then 4. He touched his chest, then pointed at the shack, at Clara in the doorway. The exchange ended. The scout turned and vanished back into the trees as silently as smoke. Eli stood alone in the moonlight for a long time. When he turned back to the shack, his face was gray. "Pack the bags," he said. His voice was dead. "What is it?" Clara asked, rushing to him. "What did he say?" "Men," Eli said, walking past her to the hearth to grab the extra ammunition. 6 of them. Hard riders. They are at the base of the trail." "The bounty hunter?" "And others," Eli said. "Hired guns. The scout says they paid a tracker in gold. A lot of gold. They know we are up here." "We have to run," Clara said, grabbing her shawl. "The trail down the backside." "There is no trail down the backside," Eli said. He slammed the cylinder of his revolver shut. "Not for a horse. And on foot. They will run us down in 2 hours. We are cornered. Clara." "Then we hide," she pleaded. "In the caves." "They have a tracker," Eli repeated. "They will smell us out. They aren't here to arrest you, Clara, men like that. They are here to take a head and a body separately if it is easier to carry." He turned to her. The tenderness of the dance was gone, replaced by a grim, iron resolve. "I am done running." "What does that mean?" Clara asked, her blood turning to ice. "It means they have to come up with that trail single file," Eli said. "It means I hold the rim." "You mean you fight?" Clara said. 6 men? Eli, that is suicide." "It is a defense," he corrected. "I have the high ground. I have a rifle. They will pay a steep price for every step." "No," Clara said, shaking her head violently. "No, I won't let you die for me. I'll go down. I'll surrender. If I give myself up, they will take me and leave." "You think so?" Eli laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "You think men who hunt women for money have honor. You walk down there. They will use you to draw me out. And then they will kill me anyway. And then—" He looked at her, his eyes dark. "I won't say what happens to you before they hang you, but I won't let it happen." "Eli, please!" She grabbed his arms. "We can find another way." "There is no other way," he shouted, gripping her shoulders. "This is it. This is the end of the line. I ran from Abilene. I ran from my sister. I have run for 10 years. I am not running from this. Not from you." He softened his grip. "I am not leaving you. Clara, not ever." Clara stared at him, seeing the absolute finality in his eyes. He had made his choice. He was trading his life for hers, or perhaps he was trading his life for his own redemption. "Okay," she whispered, tears spilling over. "Okay." The waiting was the hardest part. The moon was full, bathing the mesa in a spectral, silver light. They knew the attack wouldn't come until dawn. The trail was too treacherous to climb in the dark. They had hours. Eli positioned his rifle and 2 boxes of cartridges behind a cluster of boulders overlooking the trailhead. He checked the sight lines. He cleared away dry brush that might block his view. When he was done, he walked back to the shack. Clara had laid out the bedroll on the porch. Under the stars, she had washed her face and let her hair down. She stood when he approached. She looked beautiful in the moonlight, tragic and ethereal. "Come here," she said. Eli went to her. He left the gun belt on the rail. He sat down on the blankets and pulled her down with him. There was no frantic energy this time, no desperate hunger. It was slow. It was heavy with the weight of goodbye. Eli kissed her forehead, her eyelids, her mouth. He memorized the texture of her skin with his hands. He undressed her slowly, treating her body like a holy relic, something precious that he had been entrusted to guard. Clara cried silently as they made love. It was a deep, reverent joining. Every touch was a sentence, every kiss a paragraph of a story that might end in the morning. "You are beautiful," Eli whispered against her neck. "God, you are beautiful." "I love you," Clara said. It was the first time she had said the words. They tasted like iron and salt. "I love you, Eli." He stopped moving. He looked down at her, his eyes shimmering. "I know," he said. "I know." He moved inside her, a slow, rhythmic rocking that felt like the heartbeat of the earth. They clung to each other, 2 castaways on a raft in a dark ocean, trying to keep the water out for just 1 more hour. When it was over, they lay entangled, the night air cooling the sweat on their skin. Eli pulled the blanket up, tucking it around her chin. "Sleep," he said. "I will watch." "Don't go yet," she begged, gripping his hand. "I'm right here," Eli said. "I'm not going anywhere until the sun comes up." He lay on his back, staring at the stars, holding her hand so tight his knuckles were white. He was calculating angles, windage, and bullet drop. He was preparing to become the killer he had tried so hard to forget. But as he felt Clara's breath even out against his shoulder, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would kill every single one of them, or he would die trying, and for the first time in his life, he knew exactly what he was fighting for. The first shot cracked the dawn silence like a whip of lightning striking dry timber. It chipped the sandstone rim mere inches from Eli's face, sending a spray of razor-sharp grit into his eyes. Eli did not flinch. He lay flat on his belly behind the cluster of boulders, the stock of his Winchester pressed tight against his shoulder. He wiped the dust from his eyes with a slow, deliberate blink and exhaled. The air on the mesa was thin and cold, biting at the lungs. Below, on the treacherous switchback trail, a hat bobbed behind a scrub oak. "One," Eli whispered. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against his bruised shoulder. The sound was deafening in the stillness, rolling off the cliff face and echoing across the vast canyon floor like thunder. Down on the trail. The hat disappeared, followed by the heavy, sickening sound of a body sliding down loose shale. "Eli!" Clara's scream from the shack was thin with terror. "Stay down!" he roared back, not turning his head. "Do not come out!" The return fire was immediate and withering. Bullets hammered the rocks around him, whining as they ricocheted into the blue sky. They were good shots. These were not drunken cowboys. They were professionals who killed for coins. Eli worked the lever of his rifle, the brass casing spinning through the air to land in the dust. He shifted his aim. He saw a flash of a duster coat moving between 2 boulders 50 yards down. He fired again. A man yelped, a sharp cry of pain that was cut short. "Pull back!" a voice shouted from below. It was the stranger from the way station. "He is pinned. Flank him on the ridge." Eli gritted his teeth. There was no flank. The trail was the only way up. But they were laying down a suppression fire that was chipping away his cover inch by inch. A slug slammed into the rock near his left ear, the impact so violent it rang his head like a bell. He fired twice more, blind suppression to keep their heads down. then rolled to his right to find a new angle. As he moved, he felt a sudden sledgehammer blow to his side. It didn't hurt at first. It just felt like he had been kicked by a mule. The air left his lungs in a rush. He gasped, trying to inhale, and tasted copper. He looked down. A dark, wet stain was blooming rapidly on his shirt, just above the hip bone. A ricochet, or a lucky shot through the gap in the rocks. Damn, he wheezed. He forced himself back up to the rifle. The world was swimming, the edges of his vision turning gray. He saw the leader, the man in the duster, breaking cover, rushing the last 20 yards of the climb, thinking Eli was done. Eli steadied his breathing. He ignored the fire spreading in his gut. He aligned the sights. Breathe. Squeeze. The rifle cracked one last time. The man in the duster stopped mid-stride. He looked surprised. He dropped his shotgun, his hands going to his chest, and then he fell backward, tumbling silently off the edge of the trail, falling 200 feet to the rocks below. The shooting stopped. "Miller is down!" someone shouted from the trail. "Pull back! Pull back!" The sound of scrambling boots and sliding rocks told the story. The remaining men were running. They had lost their leader and 2 others. The price of the bounty had just become too high. Eli watched them go until they were specks retreating into the tree line at the base of the mesa. He tried to stand up to shout a warning, to tell them never to come back. His legs refused to obey. The rifle slipped from his numb fingers. The sky spun in a lazy circle, blue and gold and white. He hit the ground hard, the impact jarring a groan from his throat. "Eli!" Clara was there. She was sliding into the dirt beside him, her hands frantic. She turned him over. Her face was a mask of horror, pale as the moon. "I got them," Eli whispered, a bloody froth bubbling on his lips. "They ran. Oh, God," Clara sobbed, seeing the wound. "Oh, God, Eli, don't," he coughed, a spasm of agony. "Don't let the fire go out." Then the darkness rose up like a tide and swallowed him whole. Pain was a living thing. It had claws and teeth, and it was eating him from the inside out. Eli woke to the smell of burning flesh. He thrashed, a guttural roar tearing from his throat, but strong hands held him down. "Hold still!" Clara's voice was fierce, hard as flint. "I have to stop the bleeding." He opened his eyes. He was in the shack. The fire was roaring in the hearth. Clara was kneeling over him, a knife in her hand. The blade was glowing red-hot. "Do it!" he gasped, gripping the edge of the wooden floorboards until splinters dug into his skin. She pressed the metal to his side. The world turned white. He didn't scream. There was no breath for it. He simply arched his back, every muscle locking in a seizure of agony, until the darkness mercifully took him again. The next 2 days were a blur of fever dreams. He saw his sister Mary, standing in the flames. He saw the man he had killed in Abilene, laughing with a hole in his chest. He saw Clara, walking away from him into a snowstorm. "Don't leave," he mumbled in his delirium. "Clara, stay. I'm here." Her voice came through the fog. Cool water touched his lips. A wet rag soothed his burning forehead. "I'm right here. Eli, I've got you." On the 3rd night, the fever broke. Eli woke with a thirst that felt like he had swallowed a desert. The shack was quiet. The fire had burned down to low coals. He turned his head. Clara was sitting on the floor beside him, her back against the wall. She was asleep, her head lolling on her chest. Her dress was stiff with dried blood. His blood, her hands, resting in her lap, were raw and blistered. He watched her for a long time. She looked small, fragile, and yet she had dragged him from the cliff, cauterized a bullet wound, and kept him alive by sheer force of will. He tried to move and hissed as the wound pulled tight. Clara woke instantly. Her eyes snapped open, wide and terrified. She lunged forward, her hand going to his forehead. "You're cool," she whispered, her voice cracking. Tears welled up in her eyes. "The fever is gone." "You saved me," Eli rasped. "You stupid, stubborn man," she wept, pressing her forehead against his shoulder. "You almost died. You almost left me alone." Not yet, Eli said, lifting a weak hand to stroke her hair. Not yet. He slept again, a true, healing sleep. But when he woke the next morning, the light in the cabin was different. It was late morning. The silence was absolute. Clara? No answer. He pushed himself up, fighting the dizziness. The pain in his side was a dull throb now, manageable. He looked around. The water bucket was full. A plate of cornbread was set within his reach, but her shawl was gone. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through the haze. Clara! He dragged himself to the door. Using the wall for support, he looked out at the corral. The bay gelding was gone. In the dust of the porch, scratched with a stick, were 3 words. I am sorry. Eli stared at the words. He understood instantly. She hadn't run to escape him. She had run to save him. She knew the bounty hunters would return with reinforcements. She knew that as long as she was a fugitive, the hunt would never end. She had gone to turn herself in. No, Eli growled. He stumbled toward the corral. There was 1 horse left, a scrawny, terrified paint pony that had belonged to one of the dead bounty hunters. It must have wandered up the trail after the rider fell. Clara had left it for him. Eli grabbed the rope halter. He didn't have the strength to saddle it. He didn't have the strength to ride, but he pulled himself onto the animal's bare back, gritting his teeth against the tearing pain in his side. Go! He kicked the pony. Run! The town of Silver City was a sprawling collection of adobe and timber clinging to the side of a ravine. It smelled of sulfur from the mines and manure from the stockyards. Clara sat on the narrow cot in the sheriff's jail cell. It had been 3 days since she rode into town and walked into the marshal's office. She had laid her hands on the desk and said, I am Clara Vance. I am the one they are looking for. The sheriff, a man named Campbell with a thick gray mustache and tired eyes, had looked at her with pity. He knew the stories. He knew Judge Ambrose had been a devil in a black robe, but he had a telegraph from Kansas demanding her extradition. I can't let you go, ma'am, Campbell had said, locking the iron door. The law is a machine. It doesn't have a heart. Now, she waited. The circuit judge had arrived yesterday. Her hearing was set for this morning. They would read the charges, declare her a fugitive, and put her on a wagon back to Kansas, back to the hanging rope. She wasn't afraid for herself. She felt a strange, numb peace. She had bought Eli's life with her own. He was safe on the mesa. He would heal. He would go to Arizona. He would live. Time to go, Mrs. Vance, Sheriff Campbell said, opening the cell door. He didn't put cuffs on her. He offered her his arm, like a gentleman escorting a lady to a dance. The courthouse was packed. Word had spread. The runaway wife who burned a judge was in town. Miners, ranchers, and curious women in bonnets filled the benches. The air was hot and smelled of unwashed bodies and tobacco. Clara kept her head high as she was led to the defendant's table. She wore the same calico dress, washed and mended, but her dignity was an armor no one could pierce. The judge, a severe man named Holloway with spectacles perched on a sharp nose, banged his gavel. This court is now in session, Holloway droned. The matter of the territory of New Mexico versus Clara Vance. Charges of murder, arson, and flight from justice. The prosecutor, a slick man from Santa Fe hired by the judge's estate, stood up. He painted a picture of a black widow, a woman who seduced a prominent man, burned him in his sleep to steal his money, and fled into the wild. Clara listened, silent. It didn't matter. None of it mattered. Does the defendant have anything to say? Judge Holloway asked, looking over his spectacles. Clara stood up. Her voice was clear, ringing in the silence. I did not kill him, but I am not sorry he is dead. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Is that your defense? Holloway asked dryly. It is the truth, Clara said. Truth does not rewrite the law. Holloway said. He picked up his gavel. If there are no other witnesses, the doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. They slammed against the walls with a sound like a gunshot. Every head turned. A man stood in the doorway. He was covered in dust. He leaned heavily on a crude crutch made from a tree branch. His shirt was stained with old blood and fresh sweat. He looked like a revenant, a man who had crawled out of the grave. "I am a witness," Eli McCrae rasped. His voice was rough, but it carried to the back of the room. "Eli," Clara gasped, half rising from her chair. "Order." "Saw," Judge Holloway shouted, banging the gavel. "Who is this man?" "My name is Eli McCrae," Eli said, limping down the center aisle. Every step was a battle. The crowd parted for him, silenced by the sheer force of his presence. "And I am here to speak for this woman." "He is a fugitive, too," the prosecutor shouted. "That is the man who shot the bounty hunters." "I shot men who attacked me on my own land," Eli said, not looking at the lawyer. He kept his eyes on the judge. "Self-defense, as per the laws of this territory." He reached the railing and gripped it with white-knuckled hands. He looked at Clara. His eyes were burning with a fierce, terrifying love. "This woman," Eli said, turning to the crowd, "is not a murderer. She is a victim who survived. I found her in the quicksand. I watched her walk through hell. I saw her nightmares." He turned back to the judge. "Her husband was a monster. He kept her sister in a cage. He beat his wife. The fire? The fire was a judgment of God, not the hand of a woman." "This is hearsay," the judge said, though he did not bang the gavel. He was watching Eli with interest. "It is not hearsay," a deep voice boomed from the side of the room. The crowd shifted again. An old man stood up from the back bench where the local tribes were permitted to sit. He was Apache. His hair was white, hanging in 2 long braids. He wore a necklace of turquoise and silver. It was Cochise's lieutenant, an elder known as Tall Salt. "I will speak," Tall Salt said. "This is highly irregular." The prosecutor sputtered. "An Indian cannot testify, and he can be in my court if I say so." Judge Holloway snapped, "Let him speak." Tall Salt walked forward. He did not look at the judge. He looked at Clara. "I was in Kansas," Tall Salt said. His English was slow and precise. "Many winters ago, I was trading horses with the man Ambrose." He paused, letting the room settle. "I had my grandson with me, a boy of 7 summers. He was working in the stables. He was small, curious. He went into the big house to see the bright lights." Clara stared at him, her hand covering her mouth. She remembered. The little boy in the hallway, the smoke. "The fire started," Tall Salt said. "My grandson was trapped in the scullery. The smoke was taking him. This woman," he pointed a gnarled finger at Clara. "She was running. She had a key in her hand. She was going to the stairs, but she saw my grandson. He was choking." The room was dead silent. "She did not go up the stairs," Tall Salt said. "She stopped. She dropped the key. She picked up my grandson. She carried him out the window. She broke her own fall to save him." He looked at the judge. "She left her own blood to burn to save a stranger's child. A woman with a black heart does not do this. She is a healer. She is a warrior." Tall Salt turned and walked back to his seat. Clara was weeping silently. She hadn't known. She hadn't known the boy belonged to anyone. She had just seen a child. Eli looked at her. "You saved a life," his eyes said. "You are not damned." Judge Holloway took off his spectacles. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked at the prosecutor, who was shuffling his papers, looking defeated. He looked at Clara, small and defiant. He looked at Eli, bleeding through his shirt, standing guard like a wolf. "The law," Holloway said quietly, "is intended to serve justice. Sometimes the two are not the same thing." He picked up a piece of paper, the extradition order, and tore it in half. "The charge of murder is dismissed for lack of evidence," Holloway declared. "The testimony stands. The fire was accidental." He leaned forward. "However, you did flee the scene. You have evaded the law." The crowd held its breath. "For the crime of fleeing justice," Holloway said, "I sentence you to time served. Case dismissed. You are free to go." The gavel slammed down. For a second, no one moved. Then, the courtroom erupted. Clara didn't hear the noise. She vaulted over the railing. Eli dropped his crutch and caught her. He hissed in pain as her weight hit him, but he didn't let go. He buried his face in her neck, breathing in the smell of her, dust and soap and freedom. "You came," she sobbed. "You came for me. I told you," Eli whispered, his voice shaking. "I'm not running anymore. Not from you." They walked out of the courthouse together, into the blinding bright sunlight of the New Mexico afternoon. The crowd spilled out behind them, cheering, staring, on the steps of the courthouse, with the whole town watching. Eli stopped. He turned Clara toward him. He didn't care about the blood on his shirt. He didn't care about the sheriff watching from the doorway. He took her face in his hands and kissed her. It was deep, unhurried, and absolute. It was a claim laid down in front of God and everyone. It said, "She is mine. I am hers. And we are still here." When they broke apart, breathless, Clara looked up at him. Her eyes were clear. The shadows finally burned away by the light. "Where to?" she asked. Eli smiled, a rare, true smile that cracked the mask of his face. He looked west, toward the blue mountains of Arizona. "Home," he said. The wagon wheels creaked a rhythm that sounded like a heartbeat, slow and steady against the rocky soil of the Arizona Territory. They had crossed the border 3 weeks ago, leaving the scorched plains of New Mexico behind them for the high timbered spine of the Mogollon Rim. The air here was different. It lacked the copper taste of fear. It smelled of pine resin, damp earth, and a silence so profound it felt like a benediction. Eli McCrae rode the paint pony, leading the 2 pack mules they had purchased in Silver City with the last of his saved wages. Clara sat on the seat of the buckboard wagon, the reins of the bay gelding in her hands. She wore a new sunbonnet, the brim shading eyes that were no longer constantly darting to the horizon. The healing wound in Eli's side still pained him when the weather turned, a dull ache that reminded him he was mortal. But he sat tall in the saddle. They found the valley by accident, or perhaps by grace. It was a box canyon tucked away behind a ridge of granite that glowed pink in the sunset. A creek, clear and cold as melted snow, cut through the center, fed by a spring high up in the crags. There was grass here, belly high to a horse, and stands of ponderosa pine that stood like pillars in a cathedral. "Here," Eli said, reining in the pony. Clara pulled the wagon to a halt. She looked out over the expanse. There were no tracks, no smoke from a neighbor's chimney, no telegraph wires, just the wind moving through the grass and the call of a red-tailed hawk circling overhead. "It is far from everything," Clara said. "That is the point," Eli replied. He dismounted, wincing slightly as his boots hit the ground. He walked to the wagon and offered her his hand. "It is a blank page. Clara, we write what we want on it." They built their life with the work of their hands. There was no other way. The first month was a grueling test of muscle and will. They lived in a canvas lean-to while they felled the trees for the cabin. Eli taught her how to use the crosscut saw, the rhythm of it a push and pull that required them to move in perfect sync. If one pushed too hard, the blade bound. If one pulled too fast, the rhythm broke. They learned to breathe together, to anticipate the other's strength. By late summer, the walls were up. They were rough-hewn logs, chinked with mud and moss, but they were solid. Eli built a stone fireplace that took up half the west wall, hauling river rocks up from the creek bed one by one. Clara mixed the mortar, her hands gray with wet clay, wiping sweat from her forehead with her forearm. They were exhausted every night, falling into their bedroll with limbs that felt like lead. But it was a good exhaustion. It was the fatigue of creation, not survival. One afternoon in early autumn, Eli rode out to hunt, leaving Clara alone at the homestead. When he returned at dusk with a buck draped over the saddle, he stopped at the edge of the clearing. Clara was kneeling by the front porch. She had cleared a strip of earth 2 feet wide along the base of the logs. She was burying seeds, columbine and poppy she had carried in her pocket all the way from the general store in Silver City. Eli watched her. In the hard years of his life, he had never known a person to plant something that could not be eaten. They won't feed us, he said, dismounting. Clara looked up, patting the dirt down over the seeds. We have the beans and the squash for our bellies. Eli, these are for our eyes. Frost will kill them in a month, he warned. Then they will sleep and come back in the spring, Clara said, wiping her hands on her apron. That is what flowers do. They survive the dark to bloom again. Eli looked at her, struck by the fierce hope in her voice. He realized then that she wasn't just planting seeds, she was planting a claim. She was telling the earth, and herself, that they would still be here when the snow melted. Right, Eli said, his voice thick. Water them well, the air is dry. As the days grew shorter and the aspen trees on the ridge turned to shivering gold, Eli decided it was time for a different kind of lesson. The memory of the bounty hunters on the mesa still haunted him. He knew that peace was a fragile thing, and in this country, a woman who could not defend herself was a liability to herself. He took the Winchester rifle from the rack above the door and a box of cartridges. Come with me, he said to Clara. They walked to the edge of the meadow. Eli set up a row of tin cans on a fallen log. He handed her the rifle. It was heavy, the wood stock smooth and cool. You know how to load it, Eli said. I have seen you watch me. I know, Clara said. She worked the lever, chambering around with a solid mechanical clack. Shoulder it tight, Eli instructed, standing behind her. He placed his hands on her waist to adjust her stance, then moved one hand to her shoulder, pressing the butt of the rifle firmly against her hollow. If you leave a gap, it will bruise you. Make it part of your arm. Clara sighted down the barrel. The tin can looked very small at 50 yards. Don't close your eyes when you pull the trigger, Eli said, his voice right at her ear. See the flash, see the hit. You have to own the bullet. Clara, from the moment it leaves the barrel until it strikes. Clara took a breath. She thought of the men on the trail. She thought of the fear that had paralyzed her in the quicksand. She tightened her grip. Crack! The rifle kicked, slamming into her shoulder. Dust puffed up 3 feet to the left of the can. You jerked, Eli said calmly. You anticipated the noise. Again. They spent hours out there, day after day. Clara's shoulder turned blue and yellow from the recoil. Her ears rang, but she did not stop. She learned to find the stillness between heartbeats. She learned to squeeze, not pull. By the end of the week, she could spin the tin can off the log 4 times out of 5. Good, Eli said, nodding as the last can clattered into the grass. You shoot better than half the men I rode with in Kansas. Clara lowered the rifle, the barrel smoking. She felt a strange, cold power in her hands. I hope I never have to do it. So do I, Eli said, taking the gun from her. But hope is poor armor. Now you have iron. Winter came down from the north like a white wolf, howling through the canyon and burying their world in 3 feet of snow. The cabin became a ship at sea, isolated in a vast ocean of white. This was the time of testing. There was no work to be done outside other than chopping wood and breaking the ice on the creek. They were confined to the single room, forced to navigate the geography of their own souls. They talked. For the first time, they really talked. Not about the weather or the chores, but about the things that lived in the shadows. One evening, while the fire snapped and popped in the hearth, Clara sat mending a tear in Eli's coat. Eli was whittling a new handle for the axe, the shavings curling onto the floor like blonde ringlets. Do you miss it? Clara asked suddenly. The trail? The movement? Eli paused, the knife resting on the wood. I miss the pay. I don't miss the dust. Or the company. We are very alone here, Clara said. Are you lonely? Clara pushed the needle through the wool. No, but I wonder about later. Later? Years from now, she said, not looking up. When we are old, who will be here? The question hung in the air. Children. She was asking about children. Eli set the wood down. He looked into the fire. I don't know. Clara, I look at my hands, and I see things I have broken. I don't know if they are fit for holding something new. My hands are not clean either, Clara whispered. I left a child to burn. I carry that every day. You saved a child, Eli corrected her, his voice firm. Tall Salt told the truth. You saved the boy. But I lost Sarah. You can't save everyone, Eli said. That is the hardest lesson of the saddle. Sometimes you have to cut the rope to save the horse. He stood up and walked to her chair. He knelt down, covering her hands with his own. The axe handle was forgotten. I don't know what kind of father I would be, Eli admitted, his voice rough with a vulnerability he rarely showed. My own father was a man who spoke with his belt. I have feared that blood is in me. Clara looked at him. She saw the scar on his cheek, the weather-beaten lines of his face, the eyes that had seen death and chosen life. You are not your father, she said fiercely, and I am not my husband. We are what we choose to be. Eli, we are the people who built this house. We are the people who stopped running. Eli turned her hand over and kissed the palm. Maybe, he said softly. Maybe one day, if the winter is kind. If the winter is kind, she agreed. The winter was long, but it was not cruel. They read to each other from a tattered Bible and a copy of Robinson Crusoe that Clara had found in the wagon. They learned the map of each other's bodies as well as they knew the valley. They fought, too sharp. Sudden arguments about firewood or cooking that flared up and died down just as quickly, ending in laughter or silence that was no longer heavy. Spring arrived with the roar of melting snow. The creek swelled, turning frothy and brown. The green returned, creeping up the valley floor day by day. And by the porch, green shoots pushed through the wet earth. Clara's columbines. On the night of the first full moon of spring, the air was warm enough to leave the door open. The scent of wet sage and pine drifted in, intoxicating and fresh. Eli sat on the edge of the bed, watching Clara. She was standing by the open door, bathed in the silver light of the moon. She unbuttoned her dress, letting it slide off her shoulders to pool on the floor. Then the shift. She stood naked in the doorway, her silhouette framed against the stars. She did not hide. She did not hunch her shoulders or turn away. She stood tall, her skin pale and luminous. She had scars, the burn mark on her arm from the fire years ago, the jagged line on her leg from the quicksand, but she wore them like medals. Eli felt a lump in his throat so large he could barely swallow. He had seen many things in his life: the Grand Canyon at sunrise, herds of buffalo that shook the earth, the northern lights dancing over the plains, but he had never seen anything as magnificent as this woman standing in his doorway. He stood up and walked to her. He stopped inches away, afraid to touch her, afraid she might vanish like a dream. You are beautiful, he whispered. God, Clara, you are the finest thing on this earth. Clara turned to face him. Her eyes were dark pools reflecting the moonlight. I am flawed. Eli, I am scared, and I am stubborn, and I am broken in places that might never heal. You are not broken, Eli said. He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw, down her neck, to the pulse beating at her throat. You are forged, like steel. He looked into her eyes, searching for the words that had been building in him for months. You think I saved you, Eli said, his voice trembling. Back in the basin. You think I pulled you out of the mud and gave you a life? You did, she said. No. Eli shook his head. I was a dead man riding... Clara, I was hollow. I had a name that wasn't mine and a heart that had turned to stone. I was just waiting for a bullet to find me. He cupped her face in both hands. You are not what I saved. You are what saved me. Clara let out a soft sound, a half-sob. She covered his hands with hers. She stepped closer, pressing her body against his, skin to skin, heat to heat. I am still sinking, she whispered, the old memory surfacing one last time, stripped of its terror. I feel it sometimes, the pull. I have you, Eli vowed. I will never let you drop. I know, she answered, tilting her head back to look at him. I am still sinking, but only into you. He kissed her then, and it was not like the desperate collision in the canyon, nor the sad goodbye on the mesa. It was a homecoming. They moved to the bed, the straw mattress rustling under their weight. They made love with the door open to the night, under the gaze of the indifferent stars. It was slow, agonizingly sweet, and completely honest. There were no secrets left between them, no false names, no hidden crimes, just the friction of skin, the mingling of breath, and the silent language of two souls that had traversed a hell of their own making to find this small slice of heaven. When it was over, they lay entangled, the night breeze cooling their bodies. Eli pulled the quilt up, tucking it around her shoulders. Clara rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart, a rhythm that was now the soundtrack of her life. "Eli?" she murmured, drifting toward sleep. "I'm here. Look at the door." Eli lifted his head. Through the open door, he could see the patch of earth by the porch. In the moonlight, the first columbine had opened, a splash of pale blue against the dark earth. "It bloomed," Eli said. "I told you," Clara whispered, her voice heavy with sleep. "Love survives the winter." Eli lay back, pulling her closer. He looked at the ceiling of the house they had built, listening to the creek rushing toward the river, and the wind moving through the pines. The ghosts were still there. Mary, Silas Grant, the judge, Sarah. But they were quiet tonight. They were just shadows in the corners, watching with no power to hurt. The seasons would turn. The snow would come again. The wolves would howl. But as Eli closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of the woman who had saved him, he knew they would be ready. They were scared. Yes, but they were alive. And they were together. Thank you for listening to this story. It has been a journey through the dust and the blood to find the heart of the frontier. I hope Clara and Eli's story resonated with you. Please comment below and tell me where you are listening from. I love knowing how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this tale, I encourage you to subscribe to From Wild West for more stories of the American frontier, where history and legend meet. Share your thoughts in English. I would love to hear what you think lies ahead for Clara and Eli in their mountain valley. Until next time, keep your powder dry and your eyes on the horizon.